everyone. Hello, Harriet. Welcome.
We're live.
Yes, we are live. We are live. And this is actually the first episode of the Jewish Women Entrepreneurs podcast. Oh my God, it's happening. I'm really, really excited. And I'm so excited that you are our first guest, Harriet. I actually had this as an intuition when I wanted to launch the podcast, and we had just been in contact. And I said, whoa, this is it. This is Harriet is the first person to invite and to interview for the podcast.
Well, I was really thrilled and honored. I didn't realize straight away that it was the opening episode. So a great honor. Yes.
Amazing. Yes, exactly. So this is the podcast where we're going to have deep conversations on women, Jewish identity, and leadership in business. Just three of my main favorite topics. So I'm just really, really excited. So every week we're going to come here in this group, we're going to stream it live, and we're going to share different episodes with guest speakers, with live coaching, book reviews, and success stories, everything to talk about those topics. And what does it mean to be a Jewish woman entrepreneur in 2021? That is the big question of this podcast. And we're going to dive in to talk about all this with you. But before, I would like to introduce you to everyone, to our listeners and the people that are watching, because not everyone knows who you are, not yet. So we will make sure that they know, how lucky we are to have you as our first guest. So Harriet is an award-winning speaker, a wellness and leadership coach, and she has empowered thousands of people over the past 16 years to believe in themselves and their potential. She has been through multiple transformations herself and knows what it takes to make deep-rooted changes that stick and to get through tough times and come out on the other side and wiser than ever. She's 17 years in recovery from addictions, left an unhappy marriage and went on to thrive, shifted from a 10-year banking career into motherhood and entrepreneurship, lives with a permanent pain condition, and after being driven onto a motorway in 2016, and is a recent breast cancer survivor. Harriet's mission is to make sure that people know their true value. She empowers her clients and audiences to leave behind self-doubt, disempowering patterns, and overwhelm in favor of new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that creates confidence, well-being, and success. She is described as a real superwoman who empowers others wherever she goes. Wow. I know it's an uncomfortable moment, but you just have to be with it because this is your bio, this is your story, this is who you are.
Absolutely. And I obviously need to go update my site, right? Because I'm actually 18 years in recovery now, not 17, in fact, 18 and a half years. So a lifetime almost.
Oh, a lifetime almost. And I think it's so also vulnerable for you to put this up there in your set. Obviously, everything I said are things that you speak about openly, and I didn't share anything that you don't share openly as well. So,
exactly.
So I think it's amazing you're sharing that. So thank you so much. So my first question is, and we were just talking before we were going live about, what does it mean to be a Jewish woman? What does it mean, with everything that is happening? My first question is, how did you react when I invited you to this Jewish Women Entrepreneur podcast? Like, what was your first reaction that there is such a podcast just for Jewish women? And what was your first reaction?
I was really excited. I was like, of course there should be such a podcast. And of course I should at some point feature on it. And I was thrilled to know that this was something that you were creating. And I think, so about 3 years ago, I moved out of London. So I live in the UK. I moved out of London to the countryside. And whereas I was always aware when I was in London of where the Jewish communities were, if I wanted to join in with them, it's so much less so. It's very rural here. And so being part of this, and obviously I attended the networking group that you've put together last week, was just such an incredible sense of community. So for me, I think my overwhelming sense was of belonging and excitement and real happiness to be included in this and to be seen as someone who, this is where I belong.
Right, exactly. That's what I felt too. I really felt that this is also why it resonated for me to invite you as our first guest. But let me ask you, we were also talking just before, with everything that's happening or that happened in the past few weeks, with Israel and with, everything that's happening around the world also. And you were just talking about it, about what you were saying with your friends. How is it to be Jewish today? Well, how do you feel about this, belonging that you were talking about? The nice thing is that we are belonging, but how is it also to carry, this flag or this identity around nowadays?
I in the last, it's been almost 5 years since the Brexit vote here in the UK, which opened the doors on, I think there was a lot of, I'm just going to say the word racism because it's too complicated to soften it and be all caveats, but assume I've done that. A lot of things that were below the surface became above the surface, and that included in some circles anti-Semitism. And then we had an issue with the leader of the opposition political party, who was seen as being some of the things that he did or some of the things that he didn't do as being anti-Semitic. And in fact, there was the tribunal here looked at it and they said, yes, in fact, there was. And it feels strangely in the last 5 years as though it's become much more unsafe or controversial to be just to be a Jewish person here, which I never ever thought I would say. Which is really shocking. And it was one of the things post-Brexit, post-Trump getting in, if, there was a point when there was an election, it was like, well, if this other guy gets in, like, where are we going? It was actually, amongst the Jewish community, a lot of people were starting to say, where will we leave? Where do we need to start making plans to go to? And that was, and I had an old school friend and her children, they live in North London in quite a Jewish suburb, and they were, racially harassed on the street, with small children. And I'm like, oh my God. And then just in the last few weeks, a lot of people have chosen to demonstrate against what's been happening, as they have done all around the world. But there has been some incidences of over anti-Semitism, with people aligning themselves, not just with the Palestinian people, but with Hamas, and with being overtly anti-Semitic. And there's been a lot of people accidentally aligning themselves because they don't understand what the slogans mean. And of course, I don't want to see any humans of any, wherever they like to think that they belong tribe-wise, I don't want to see anyone hurt. Nobody does. But to see people a lot, and I've had to speak up quite a few times on social media and say, do you realize, I don't know if you did realize, but do you realize this thing that you've posted, this is what it means, and this is what you're aligning with, and did you mean to do that? Because if you do, great, I'd like to know that about you, and like, I'm done with you. But if you didn't, like, maybe, so there's been this sense of needing to educate, but also, I'm not someone who sits back. If I see something out there, whether that's, racism, sexism, anything, I'm going to speak up about it. I'm very much an activist as well as the work that I do. And so in the same way, I'm not going to let anything slide on social media if I feel it needs to be called out. But there's been some really sticky situations, and it's been really uncomfortable at times. And although it doesn't look like anything's changed, actually there's a sense that the atmosphere has changed quite a lot. And I don't think it helps either that a lot of the conspiracy stuff around the pandemic was about, the secret, the Illuminati, the George Soros thing. The number of people who I thought were much more awake and educated writing that kind of thing on social media. So it feels like, it almost feels like anti-Semitism is the acceptable racism, which is, it's quite scary. It's quite scary, and it's the place where the far left and the far right align, isn't it? So yeah. So it's I've never been more aware of my Jewishness counting as part of who I am, and as something that people might judge me on.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, because a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, but people that are on social media, or whether we live in Israel or we live outside of Israel, and we have our ideas, and this is a topic that comes up a lot, is like, how much do I have to say what I think, and how much do I have to put myself out there? Because on the one hand, like you said, we can't sit back and just watch it happen. On the other hand, I'm a business person. I don't want to necessarily have to have a position on my religion or my nationality, or which country do I live in. And so I know, in Israel also, but I know across the globe, it's also a position to take. Like, do we take this position? Do we use our voice? If we are a leader in
Absolutely. Well, interestingly, one lady, she's in America, and she is very far left, and she's an absolute crusader for all sorts of things, and she believes very passionately about it. And she put up a post saying, where are all of my Jewish friends who were so vocal with Black Lives Matter and some of the other things last year? Why are you not speaking up about what's happening? And it was like, wow. So in the same way that if there was a, radical Islamic terrorist attack, like, what, all the Muslims are supposed to come out of their homes and go, we don't agree with this, like literally calling for that. And it was like, wow. And so, and then when I looked through the comments as well, it was very clear there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and I just called all of it out. And I had a lot of people private messaging me saying thank you, and that they didn't feel able to do that. Right. But I just thought, I have to do it.
Where do you find the courage to do that?
For me, it's not, there's no option. I cannot stand, it's like if I walked down the street and I saw a child being assaulted, or I saw an animal being mistreated, I would just intervene, because that's the right thing to do. And I also think that if you do understand a topic and it's personally relevant for you, then perhaps you feel you've got the authority and the knowledge to chip in, right? And so when someone on this thread had said, blah, blah, swear words, Jewish government, I was like, okay, it's okay if you switch that word for Israeli government, that's okay, but it's not okay to write Jewish government. And then a lot of people had agreed with her before I'd even seen it. So I was like, this is why I'm saying this thread is anti-Semitic, right? So just, just kind of shining a light on things.
Right. I was going to ask you, because I've had this conversation with a lot of people actually from overseas. This is one of my favorite conversations to have, which is, how do you combine, or how do you align, or how do you integrate your Jewish identity and your relationship with Israel, right? A lot of time people are, confusing the two. They feel like, okay, if I say that I'm Jewish, that I'm automatically supporting, what Israel does as a country, right? And not only people from the outside, but also even Jewish people around the world. Sometimes they're not really comfortable talking about their Jewish identity, because they feel like this is saying,
it'll be assumed, right, that they're supporting.
Exactly, that they're automatically supporting what Israel does. So how is it for you? Like, for you and yourself first, like how do you make this?
I think that because I'm outspoken on all kinds of topics, and I am politically involved and very conscious and all of that, I'm always putting my head above the parapet and just saying, this is how I see it. And then all kinds of people shoot me down. And then all kinds of other people support me. And I'm like, well, this is an interesting conversation. And I think it's the same if people were to assume that of me. I would probably say, it's really interesting that you made that assumption. Why, without learning what my actual view is. So do you want to have a conversation based on your assumptions, or do you want to have should we just drop the assumptions and I can share with you? But interestingly, it feels like when I used to live in London, amongst my friends, the other mothers at school, that kind of thing, this kind of conversation would have come up. But down here, it feels like it's a lot quieter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure people do have their political views and they do talk about this stuff, but maybe it just feels a bit more distant.
Right, right. But what is it for you, like the difference between your relationship with your Jewish identity and your relationship with Israel? Like, could you describe both and how are they the same and different?
Gosh, that's an interesting question. I'm very proud of my Jewish identity, and I love my Jewish identity, and I love coming from a Jewish family and everything that's within my family history, and I love the fact that I have the Jewish hair, and on the occasions I don't go to synagogue very often, but when I do, I like totally, I don't stand out. I'm like totally part of the crowd, and I love that. And in terms of I would say my relationship with Israel feels very different. I've visited the country twice, and had very different experiences each time. The first time I was a child, and my father took me, just the two of us, for a short week, and it was very much about sightseeing and understanding. And we went to Yad Vashem and all sorts of places, and it was, Masada and all that kind of thing. Whereas the second time I went with a boyfriend, and it was more of a holiday, but we also did some, looked at some charity stuff as well, and just things like that. It's more of a complicated relationship with Israel, I would say, in that because of the politics, but also because of various family history and family ties, I feel like I really want Israel to succeed, but I also really want there to be peace and fairness, and I want good things for everyone who lives in that space, so it feels more complicated.
And is it the same with the people around you, like the other Jewish friends that you have? Do you feel like they also like have a very clear relationship with their Jewish identity, but is more complicated with Israel, or?
Yes, definitely. I'm thinking of one particular friend who sadly passed away actually a couple of years ago, but her and I used to talk about it a lot because a couple of her sisters had moved to Israel, and we did used to talk about being Jewish in the UK, and then the relationship with Israel. And she actually had, I think she felt more aligned with Israel because she went there quite often to visit her sisters and her nieces and nephews and all that kind of thing. That's probably. But I would say that, when I think about family in general, and friends, I think it does feel difficult.
Right. And so we can't help but notice also that your name is very Jewish, right?
Yes.
Because Harriet, Waley, Cohen, there's no like mistake around it. And I actually thought it was a combination of your ex-husband's name and your maiden name. But just before the live, you told me about the story of that name. And do you want to share?
Yes. So Waley Cohen is my maiden name. And so it was my great grandmother, who was a Waley, and she married a Cohen, and she insisted she was a bit of an early feminist. In fact, I mean, there's a lot of strong women in my family who are like, no, we do it like this, and she insisted, and so the names were put together and carried forward from that point. And there's not very many Waley Cohens, and we're all related. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And so do you get any judgment or, name? I mean, do you have any remarks on your name, or do you get called because of your name? Is that something that is difficult to carry, or what is your?
No, I've never felt that whatsoever. Interestingly, there was one situation when I was at school, I guess I must have been around 10 or 11 years old, where somebody made a comment and I was upset by it, and I had forgotten about it. And you know what? She felt some sense of deep remorse, and she contacted me either earlier this year or late last year. She contacted me through my website and apologized.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was like, okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I think it felt like a more pronounced difference when I was at school, because I wasn't at a Jewish school. It was, so there was just a few of us, a very small few of us, of which most of us were myself and my brothers, who were the Jewish kids, who would, when the others were doing Christian things or whatever they were doing, we would we would be doing, Jewish cultural lessons or whatever we were doing. So it felt very much like we were separate, we were different, and there were very few of us.
Right. And so, but still, even though you were separate, you were different, you were not like everyone else, it feels when you're talking about your Jewish identity that you're, like you said, you were very proud of it. It's something that you
Yes.
love, that you're really integrated. So how do you explain that? Like, how do you explain that even though it was the same thing that put you apart, like made you different, but today you're still talking about it with, a very good feeling? Like, is it the way you were brought up? Is it your education?
I think it is. I think it's to do with a deep sense of family and respect and family love and love for our heritage, love for what we've contributed to the world. God, that sounds quite arrogant, but just, we all contribute to the world, like in terms of the kinds of things that my ancestors have done. I feel, and that my siblings, even in their respective fields, I'm really proud of what we contribute. Yeah. And I think with that, there comes, and it's part of the Jewish identity, isn't it? To be, the family values, a sense of justice, a sense of doing good in the world. It feels important.
It does, definitely. And so your father has been involved with Israel. You said that he had some activities.
Yes, that's right. He's been involved with a charity called ICA, which is involved in educational and agricultural projects. He's been involved for many, many, many years, and his father before him. So there's a lot of ways in which different projects that they funded. I mean, I'm not involved with it myself, so I can't talk in detail about it, but I do feel a real sense of pride at what that charity has achieved and the small part that we've played in that. And yeah,
for sure. And you said something interesting. You said that, that the sense of justice, of sharing, of giving, contributing, that was probably part of the Jewish identity. And that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how do you feel that the Jewishness or the Jewish characteristics of your identity has helped you in your life, in your business? Are there some characteristics of being Jewish or being connected to that identity that you have been able to use or to benefit from throughout your life? Do you identify them as such?
Well, I suppose that it's to do with the values that get passed down to you through your family as you're growing up. This sense of family, this sense of supporting other people, this sense of doing your best, being honest, like all these sorts of things. So to me, I suppose it feels more like family values than Jewish values. Although when I think about every year, when we have the big family Seder and we read the story and recount the story, and you think about the wider meanings and how much it all applies today just as much, then it does feel like this is a beautiful thing to be aligned with. No?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I think you're right. I think it is really connected to the family tradition and to the education that you got, because it's not coming from nowhere, right? Some people have a different relationship with their Jewish identity, and it's probably also because of where they got it from and how it was passed down. And so it's very, very much connected to that.
Exactly.
If you had, I'm a very strong believer, and when I speak a lot about the role of women, not only in the for the Jewish people, but in general, right? The feminine dimension, and I'm not the only one, of course. A lot of people talk about that, and there must be a reason, right? Because it's in the air, and that there is a special, turn of events now that the world is more connecting and aligning to its feminine dimension, which doesn't mean only women. Obviously, as we know, it's a dimension, and we see a lot of people talking about a lot of women being more empowered. I know this is part of your work also, of empowering women around their self-worth, and I would love to hear you, to share with us, what do you think is the role of the Jewish woman in this bigger picture of, where's this Jewish identity going, or even, where is this alignment between Jewish identity and Israel? I mean, this whole big part of ourselves, which is who we are. Do you think that Jewish women have a special role to play in this?
I do. And I think that's tied with the fact that I think that all women have a special role to play and so much to contribute. And I do love the fact that within the Jewish family unit, that the mother, the female, the women have such an important role, because there are other cultures, many all around the world, that are so much more patriarchal, right? Where the women don't have so many rights or freedoms. But I think that Jewish women are good at being feminine, and part of that is because the Jewish men are very masculine. You know, they are that competitive. You know, they want to be the hero, they want to be the caretaker, all of that, and it perhaps allows space for the woman to be, you know, to be the queen of the family, to be the mother figure, all of that kind of thing. So I think that perhaps, is it more in our nature? I don't know. It's kind of on an individual basis. But certainly the Jewish families that I see, you see the women are really held up. You know, they're the goddesses of the family. And I think that's wonderful for any girls that are born, that they see that and they're like, okay, the women are respected. You know, that's really important. Yeah, and I do think in terms of the rise of feminine energy, or the rebirth of feminine energy, because it's always been there. It's just that, you know, these patriarchal forces have, you know, kept that away. I think in terms of the healing of the planet, in terms of our overall happiness, all of these things, this more feminine energy of collaboration rather than competition, of sharing, of not wanting there to be excess, you know, wanting there to be more equality, more safety, all of these feminine values. Of course, that has a massive part to play in the future I'd like to see unfold. And of course, Jewish women have a part to play, of course.
Are you saying, like, as much as for all the other dimension and all the other, you know, part of everything that's happening in the rebirth? I love how you say the rebirth, by the way. It's you think it's at the same level, or do you see like a different part of the story going, you know, a different way? Do you see it differently?
I don't know. I haven't actually thought about that specifically, so I'm not going to just make something up. But I do think something to be said for, as I said, for the way that within Jewish families that the women really are revered, rather than second-class citizens. I think that you know, a lot of cultures could gain some balance by allowing the women to be seen that way, rather than, you know, dispensable or unimportant or stuck in the kitchen or whatever.
Yeah, but I'd love you saying that, because I know for a fact, from my personal history, from people that I see around me, that in some part of Jewish identity and the Jewish people, women are still only in the kitchen and
Really?
and not. Yes, because it's also very.
I
very
see Jewish women. Maybe it's because the vast majority of Jewish women I know are here in the UK. We're all super feisty. You know, you would not mess with any of us, and we're all real go-getters, and we're ambitious, and we're outspoken. Yeah,
it's connected to also the cultural background of, you know, where the people come from, right? Obviously, where, you know, when Jews came from patriarchal societies, then, you know, they took on also those values. So so I love that you're seeing that from your perspective, and you're saying, hey, I'm seeing women as a goddess, where I know that in some other parts of, you know, the Jewish people, or different ways of expressing that, it's still a battle, right? In the ultra Orthodox world, in the more Sephardic world from North Africa, like, you know, there are places where women still have to fight and still have to fight for their place. And I love that you're seeing it as such.
Isn't that incredible that there's women like you and I who specifically empower and like to raise up other women and boost them, that we're here to say, look, it can be done, and we'll show you how, and we'll take you with us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. That's amazing. That's really amazing. So I'm going to ask my last question, and we're going to close this amazing interview. What about if you had a wish or a vision, for the Jewish women entrepreneur? If you had to say, this is what I wish, and this is how I see the Jewish women entrepreneur. Because of this cultural and this, identity, everything that we spoke about, what would be an empowering vision that you can leave us with, that you would love to see, how those women can be, like we said, empowered?
Yeah, I would like for all Jewish female entrepreneurs to know their value and know that their Jewishness, their values, their everything about their identity is something that they're not to be ashamed of, not to feel they have to hide, and something that actually will help draw their tribe to them and help their business to thrive. And that actually, the more that they can own who they truly are and unapologetically be that person and shine and be like, this is who I am, the greater the impact they'll be able to make.
I love it. Thank you so much, Harriet. Thank you for being with us, for sharing your wisdom.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
It was just amazing. We're going to close this. Podcast episode, and we will be back for a live episode next week, Sunday at 6. But until then, everyone will be able to see and watch and listen to this episode from on our website until we get to all the Apple podcasts and all the things that we're working on. Thank you so much, Harriet. Sending you much love. And bye.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.